Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. I want to welcome to the program Trita Parsi. He's the Executive Vice President at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Trita, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, let's talk about the peripheral aspects of this and whether they stay on the periphery, I guess. Who are in terms of this conflict widening, and we have no idea, we have a good sense, but we don't really know what further actions Israel's going to take in terms of invading Gaza. But with the assumption that there is going to be some type of incursion into Gaza by the Israeli forces, give us a sense of the peripheral players who may get involved at that point. Like, what is the first sort of like domino, I guess, that could fall in this instance?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. I think this is a very dangerous situation. It would require a tremendous amount of discipline by a lot of different players to ensure that this does not escalate into a region-wide war. You have already now some skirmishes up in the north from Hezbollah and Israel. 5 Israelis have been killed. Now, those are not necessarily unusual. They tend to happen. It's become more intense. It's still within the rules of the game that the Israelis and the Hezbollah has established for themselves. I think the big concern is this. If the Israelis go in by land, which at this point seems, almost inevitable, and it ends up becoming extremely bloody, which also seems to more or less be inevitable, and potentially leads to a significant weakening of Hamas. At that point, there is a risk that Hezbollah may step in because of not necessarily saving Hamas, because I don't think that's, their relationship is close enough to that, but in order to save themselves, because there are fears. And there's some Israelis that are already making the argument that since more than 300,000 reservists have already been gathered right now, that Israel actually is ready for a war with Hezbollah. So why not go there? I'm not saying it's a majority opinion, but it's an opinion that is being expressed inside the Israeli government. And if Hezbollah does this, if we end up having a war, not just skirmishes towards the north, with Hezbollah being involved, the argument that Iran is involved takes on a completely different meaning, because Iran's relationship with Hezbollah is much, much tighter and coordinated than it is and ever has been with Hamas. Some of those early reporting about an Iranian war with Hamas, we cannot completely rule it out, but what was the basis of that was highly unconvincing to me, given the nature of that relationship. If the Iranians are more directly involved, it's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on the United States to take military action. We've already seen that the administration's strategy by moving warships to the Mediterranean, by the president himself very clearly telling the Iranians don't, is seeking to deter them from getting involved. My critique of that is, while I think it's absolutely correct to deter the Iranians and others not to get involved, I'm not really sure how that's going to work out if there at the same time is very little restraint, if any, that is being asked of the Israelis. Because if the Israelis don't show restraint, if this then ends up becoming a true bloodbath in Gaza, then it's very difficult to expect that even the deterrence of an American attack will ensure that there will be restraint shown by Hezbollah.
Can you? I just want one follow up on this. So, in terms of what will I guess motivate Hezbollah? Will it be the idea that the loss of Hamas as a potential threat to Israel will make Hezbollah like the sole threat that Israel at that point, who has now amassed, hundreds of thousands of extra troops, will be sitting there and they'll just continue on? Or is it possible, or does Hezbollah feel threatened and therefore that they need to begin to engage merely because they're reacting to perhaps the carnage of civilians?
I don't think it's so much of the carnage of civilians. That will definitely put pressure on them from below. And those images may not be shown on American TV stations, but they will be shown by Arab TV stations, by Al Jazeera, etc. And it will inflame the entire region in that sense. But I think it's more that you have to put yourself in thinking, how do they perceive the situation? And we may think that it's clear Israel is not going to be, on a war footing and actually extend the war into Lebanon. You're sitting where Hezbollah is, you're not necessarily going to count on that, particularly when you see more than 300,000 reservists being gathered and equipped for war right now. So it's about what their perception is of what the threat picture to them will be if they are sitting and not intervening and allowing Israel to have a successful raid in Gaza that more or less decimates Hamas. Now, first of all, I'm not so sure that that even is going to be the scenario, in the sense that I'm not so clear how Israel actually would succeed in doing so. They can damage Hamas tremendously, but to truly defeat it, as the Israeli objective is, seems very difficult to achieve. But the point being that their perception is that if Israel is not if it doesn't have to deal with Hamas, if Hamas more or less has been taken off of the playing field, then Israel will then move north, and Hezbollah will be in a much more precarious situation. And as a result, it is more rational for them to intervene prior to that and not save Hamas, but at least try to see if that victory of Israel becomes a Pyrrhic victory, which then would disable it from moving north and taking on Hezbollah.
Makes total sense. I'm wondering just if you could zoom out for a second, because our audience may have heard the term Hezbollah before, but may not have a full understanding of what Hezbollah is. Can you explain that, its connection to Lebanon and then Iran as well?
So Hezbollah is a Shia Muslim movement that was created in the early 1980s in Lebanon through the explicit help of the Iranians. This is early in the Iranian Revolution, when the Iranians were trying to spread the Islamic revolution. To some extent, Hezbollah would never have been successful in its creation had it not been for the Israeli invasion of Lebanon back in 1982, which actually kind of galvanized opinion there against the Israelis, not initially, but after a couple of months. Now, Hezbollah's relationship with Iran is very, very close. They're both Shia. Hezbollah essentially are seeing Iran's supreme leader as their spiritual guide. They're all within that same ideology and ideological view of the region. The Iranians have armed, trained, equipped Hezbollah. They view them as their first line of defense against Israel. Part of the reason why I don't think the Iranians were looking for a nuclear bomb to deter Israel is because through Hezbollah, they believe that they already have a pretty effective deterrence. We saw the war in 2006 when Israel went into southern Lebanon, ultimately failing in defeating Hezbollah. It ended up becoming a success or a victory for Hezbollah by virtue of essentially surviving that fight. And that was after 34,000 Israeli troops invaded southern Lebanon. Their relationship is completely different from that of Iran's relationship with Hamas. Hamas comes out of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, a Sunni movement. Its original founder, Yassin, that the Israelis assassinated in 2004, absolutely detested the Iranians and the Shias, and did everything to make sure that Hamas did not move closer to Iran and kept a very significant distance from. After his assassination, things have changed between Hamas and Iran, but not to the extent in which the Iranians and Hamas have the same relationship as with Hezbollah.